Yo, what's good everybody? You got Sketch here and welcome back to the channel. And on this episode we're taking a look at the final vertical entry of the Aero Fighters series, being Sonic Wings 3, or Aero Fighters 3 for the US region, developed and published by Video System and distributed by SNK for the home and arcade in 1995. This installment of the series is the most polished of the 2D games and equally as fast, if not faster than the last few in a few areas, which we'll get into shortly. This is also a bit of the shift for the series' visual style as well, falling more in line with the pre-rendered titles that were also being distributed by SNK in the same year, like Polestar for example. The story is pretty fun, albeit brief this time around, so let's check that out real quick. After the events of the last game, when all is thought to be said and done, the alien forces have got your ass with a surprise attack on the Aero Fighters base, destroying every craft on site except for one conveniently placed hangar of modified World War II era warplanes. Your team reassembles once again to crush the threat expeditiously for the final conflict. This counterattack will span far and wide in pursuit of the enemy, so strap in and load up. Your skill is about to be tested once again. Gameplay wise, you've got a vertical shoot 'em up with an updated look compared to the last outing, and the style has more of a blend of the Aero Fighters and something like Psycho's Strikers 1945. The more modern enemies and tech is mostly replaced with craft of the World War II era, along with all the enemy types you'd expect to see, similar to the last game's roster. Enemies start out somewhat grounded in the World War II aesthetic and then quickly escalate into the prototype weaponry and giant underwater mythological creatures, and it makes for some really interesting creations for you to body through each slipgate. This time around you've got 10 selectable pilots with some new and returning characters, each with new crafts and abilities. The Mega Crush bombs once again vary depending on which craft you fly, and they've all been dialed up to 11 this time around. The game has a total of 18 stages, with a branching path system which not only changes bosses, but also contains unique stages which again loops twice before seeing the game's ending. Something you'll probably notice is how much is jammed into these stages, and even from the opening stage, it starts out a bit intense. Through the game's runtime, considering how much is happening per stage, finishing with a boss encounter, you'll see levels go by very quickly. Sometimes it's almost like you blink and you're at the start of the next one already. That's not to say that the action isn't popping like the newscaster from Scanners, but the pacing is very fast compared to the first two games. It's wild to think you can finish both loops of Aero Fighters 3 in under 30 minutes, but for what's on offer, it's a ride of a shooter. The bonus stages from past entries return as well, and they're just as wild as the last time, if not more so. With the sheer size and volume of enemies it throws on screen, along with all the weapons and bonuses. There's even a few variations of the bonus stage depending on the branching path, and this time some enemies will shoot back, and collisions will cost a life. These also feel much shorter than the previous games too, but still the objective remains the same, and it's still just as fun. Once again, like the last couple of entries, once you get to the final stage, you have to complete it in one set of stocks, otherwise you must restart the level. This brings back a couple of bosses from Aero Fighters 1 and 2, and it's pretty great how it combines them into a hilariously awesome mid-boss fight. Though it leads up to a new, even more interesting behemoth which looks like something out of a Darius game, or a giant flying saucer that spits projectiles everywhere. There are several combinations of how the final stages and encounters can go, and each time the enemy will throw some aggressive attacks at you, so stay on your toes is the best advice I could give. Graphics wise, this retains a great deal of the style from the previous games and adds in the World War II aesthetic to the player and enemy sprites. While the planes do look a little smaller during gameplay, the hitbox also seems a bit tighter as well. Sprites are all well detailed and every explosion looks sick here with a new coat of paint visually. A few boss sprites also have a similar look to the earlier Metal Slug games, with its attention to detail and at times off-kilter character models, all of which look awesome. Level designs, while short, pack a lot of objects into the frame even though you're speeding through them most of the time. Each stage has a superb level of detail, from the deserts to the ocean and everything in between. The Easter eggs and stages are also fun to find with the randomized levels and branching paths. There's a good amount to see on each play since it has a few rotating parameters which do affect the gameplay. The character roster also has some hilarious characters to choose from, and all are quite powerful this go around. While the world map cutscene is reworked in this entry, the characters now splash on screen with some dialogue as to what's ahead, and a lot of it is pretty hilarious as far as the dialogue. The ending cutscenes are also pretty funny this time, with Spanky the Dolphin's ending having a similar vibe to the secret dog ending of Silent Hill 2. Playing through at least the first loop with each character is pretty entertaining to see their ending cutscenes. Boss designs are also pretty sick here, with some massive sprites at the end of each stage, except for 3 and 6, which are bonus levels. From the first to last encounter, each one will not only Hulk on screen more often than not, but also at times throw smaller, more nimble bosses at you that can make short work of you, so it encourages you to be ready for anything. The final encounters on the last stages are also callbacks to the previous games, along with some added surprises, so there's a good bit of replay value for those that want to see just how many variations there might be. Sound-wise, this entry mixes it up quite a bit, especially with its soundtrack that is mostly electronic music. There's actually a few catchy jump up and liquid drum and bass tunes in here, so while not conventional, it's got some tracks in here that slap. The wartime tunes one might expect with the World War II theme don't really appear, and instead is just about all drum and bass, which stays pretty much hype end to end. The musical choice is pretty interesting, and I'm honestly curious if any of the composers or members of the sound team went on to produce after this release. Sound effects work is once again solid, with some proper crunchy audio from the sound of the Vulcan cannons to the explosions of each downed enemy. There's even a bit of voice synth when the boss themes kick in also. The audio seriously bangs here, and on a stereo system would likely cook the room. For the last 2D entry of the franchise, franchise, Aero Fighters 3 does some bold stuff for the series and goes out with a solid release as a whole in just about every area. Overall, Aero Fighters 3 is an awesome finale to the 2D entries of the series, and this, much like its previous entries, is a lot of fun to play through and get familiar with. If you play through the titles leading up to this one, it will feel very familiar and the updates will be noticeable. It's a solid entry to the series and has a lot of replay value throughout the game's arcade mode, along with its caravan and high score modes, so there's a good lot to go for. Aero Fighters 3 gets an 8 out of 10 and comes recommended to shoot 'em up fans and fans of the franchise, since it is more of the same and a bit extra. It's a solid end to round out a fairly strong series, and with its arcade archive release is more easily available. While this didn't make it to the US region on the AES hardware, it is on the Neo Geo CD and MVS system. It's also available through the Arcade Archives collection on the Nintendo Switch, Xbox One, and PS4. The last Aero Fighters game was released to the Nintendo 64 as an exclusive and would change the style of the game drastically from vertical shooter to a combat flight simulator with the introduction of 3D graphics. It would be a collaboration with Paradigm Entertainment and Vic Tokai. Maybe sometime in the future we'll take a look at this one too, since it is quite an interesting tale. But I thank you again if you made it this far into the video. If you find these videos helpful, that's awesome. Glad you use that as a resource. Check back often. We'll have more reviews and commentaries come up in the near future. But until then, take it easy and stay safe out there. I'll see you on the next one.